Excellent. So my name is Traven Rice, and I am the co-founder and arts and culture editor for The Lowdown. We've been covering Lower East Side community, neighborhood, which is a very big neighborhood, since 2009. But I'm really delighted to be launching this podcast. We're often running specifically with the intention to talk about culture, and specifically within culture changers, people who have contributed in all different ways to, I think, shifting, changing, enhancing culture in whatever different ways that might mean, what that looks like. Mm-hmm. So we're very delighted that we could be here with Alex Knowlton from
Neighbor Out the Window.
Oh, Neighbor Out the Window, yes. Oh, I should mention we're at P&T Knitwear on Orchard Street in their community podcast, which is lovely. So please tell your friends. And so, yes, we can see Orchard Street live right here, and the neighbors walking by. Please tell your friends that P&T Knitwear, a wonderful bookstore, also has a wonderful podcast.
And a wonderful coffee shop.
Studio and coffee shop. So Alex is the director of Joe's Pub. And Joe's Pub, if you don't know, is a cabaret space, I think is what we would call it. The New York Times called it one of the premier nightclubs of New York, known for eclectic programming, ranging from intimate showcases with Amy Winehouse, Adele, Leonard Cohen, and the like, to world music artists like Konono #1 and Youssou N'Dour, to the downtown cabaret scene of Bridget Everett, Alan Cumming, and Justin Vivian Bond, to funny people like Amy Schumer and Reggie Watts, on and on and on. So it also supports theater artists, new work, established work. So it's a wonderful, small musical space, live, performance space within Joe's Pub. Mm-hmm. I mean, within the public.
Right.
Within the public.
That's true. That's us. That's a good recap. It's sort of humbling to hear it all said in one mouthful. Thank you for that incredible welcome. It's an honor to be here and to get a chance to talk about what we're doing, what we're trying to do, what we're failing at doing, and everything in between.
Oh, wow, what we're failing to do. I want to know all of those things. And I just want to say, for what it's worth, it's one of my all-time favorite places to go out in New York still, and it's a great date spot. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do date night there quite a bit. We've seen lots of wonderful people, and you never always know what you're going to get, but it's always going to be great, I think, and a really fun night.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so tell us about how you got there.
Sure.
And also, the history. I know there's a big birthday coming up.
Yeah, that's right. This coming October will be our 25th anniversary, and the doors opened in 1998. And it was sort of like the first 3 years was a little bit of shape-shifting for Joe's Pub, figuring out what all it wanted to be. And it's been really fascinating to be a part of the legacy of such a storied place. And I've been at Joe's since 2009 with like on and off with a little 3-year gap in the middle there. And so that is, thinking about it, this 25th anniversary, I did the quick math. I was like, oh my God, I've been there for half the time this place has been open. It's really sort of completely humbling and amazing to be in such incredible community with my colleagues currently, and standing on the shoulders and inspired by so many folks that have been leaders of that space and organization and community before me. Bill and Shanta and Wiley and Bonnie and George and Walter and KB and Dodo and everybody that's really like shepherded so many of the relationships that are still important to our artistic community. Really have been a cumulative effort of, connecting with people over 25 years. Our opening performance was with Nona Hendricks and Carl Hancock Rux, and both of them still play with us at Joe's, and It's completely like the most incredible thing to have that sort of longevity and growth over careers and half a generation and that depth.
So what's your sense of, I know, so the public has been around longer.
Yeah, I think they've been in the building since the 60s, I think
Yeah.
1965.
And then was this always a plan, or was it really like what feels like something else that we could add to it? I mean, was this
the origin story of Joe's Pub?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when George C. Wolfe was the artistic director of the Public in the late 90s, there's all this sort of folklore about the early days and the post Joe Papp era of the Public, and the physical space of Joe's Pub used to be sort of, I describe it as like a room version of that drawer in your kitchen where the like rubber bands go and where there's like the half broken pair of scissors. Like it was sometimes Gail Papp's office. It was sometimes the literary storage where they would keep scripts. I think it was the casting department for a little while. It was kind of just this flexible, big, unarticulated room. And my favorite version of the folklore, and I say folklore because I don't know where in the truth spectrum this actually lands, but my understanding is that George was in that space, George C. Wolfe, and sort of looking at the architecture of it. And if you're in the room, there's these large pillars that, sometimes they block your view and sometimes they're just there. But there's these large structural pillars that are in the space. And if you kind of look at them, there's three of them that kind of make a triangle. And energetically and artistically and emotionally, the fourth pillar that would make the diamond that would complete this shape is now where sort of the thrust of the Joe's Pub stage is. And so I really love that vision that George had of saying, like, how can we create this shape? Most of the shape is already here. What actually holds up the room is 1, 2, 3 structural pillars, and emotionally, artistically, the stage is holding up the roof, holding up the ceiling, holding up the upstairs. So I feel like that, to me, is like, there's your mission, there's your reason to go to work, there's all of it is like, how do we do our best to just like hold up this place and maintain it and make sure it's still there for New Yorkers to enjoy the art on stage, maybe find themselves on stage either emotionally or representationally or even physically. And that's, I just love that vision. And so that was 1998 that we first opened. It was a little bit of a trial period figuring out, is this going to be pre-show dinner before the theatrical productions and the rest of the building? So for a little while, it was sort of like the dinner space, and then once the last curtain in the Newman or the Ansbacher went up, it was turned over into a nightclub. And it was like velvet ropes in the alley, nightclub vibe, sort of like a who's who on the guest list. It was very much in the late 90s sort of end of the century opulence, and it was around 2001, actually, after 9/11, when everyone was sort of looking around and thinking, like, what's the future of downtown gonna be? What's the future of New York gonna be? And Bill Bragan, who was the director of Joe's Pub at that time, really established the structure that we're more or less maintaining, which is using, on a good day I say it's a numbers game, on a bad day I say it's a numbers game. How do we leverage a small space to meet 100,000 people a year? Wow. And so that truly is just volume. And that's, with that volume comes quick movement, imperfection, and also just comes with a lot of yeses. We say yes to 700 artists a year because we're doing shows 2 times a night all year long. And so that exhaustion on the other side of the coin is just like maximizing opportunity for a small space.
When you said you say yes, so that's the programming, is people
say
pitching
yes
themselves.
And stay out of the way. Pretty much. I mean, there's sort of like these. We sort of, Isabel, my colleague Isabel, and I do all of the programming on the calendar, and we sort of work in seasons, because without a structure and without a real horizon line, I find it's easy to sort of forget which way is up. Mm-hmm. It just never ends. There's no plateau ahead of you. The calendar just keeps going.
Because there's not like a summer break.
There's not a summer break.
Or a winter break.
And there's not a like, if this was the rest of the public theater, for example, has a big push to the season announcement in June. So everything needs to be done by the season announcement, and if we miss it, then it's a different articulation. It's a different way that we talk about it. But really, like, we get there, and then, okay, we've announced, and now we have to do. And we're constantly announcing and constantly doing, and sort of like on the treadmill. And the treadmill just never stops. So programming-wise, we're always sort of working in the short, middle, and long term, and try to be sort of thoughtful about that long term, not opening the floodgates too far out before we have our bedrock vision for what the spring is going to look like. So Isabel and I will do outreach to artists that, hey, we've said no to them a lot and we've been meaning to get them in, but the dates never line up. Let's just say, hey, March, April, May, tell us a day, it's yours. And so we can prioritize some of those folks that we feel like we haven't been able to program for various reasons, usually just calendar circumstance. And sometimes more ambitious, large ideas that encompass like 3 nights in a row, and we can't really just plop those in. Those have to be sort of built around. And there's also institutional priorities from the rest of the public, residencies, of which there are fewer, but there's certainly a number of recurring artists that we want to just make sure that we're maintaining that consistency for. Toshi Regan has her annual birthday shows in January. We need to just make sure those dates find their way on the calendar before we sort of, to your point, start saying yes to people that reach out to us. And there's just sort of an ongoing back and forth with artists and producers and agents and managers and friends and colleagues that sort of help us to sort of filter and help with getting referrals and keeping new relationships, or making new relationships and keeping and maintaining existing relationships. So,
I mean, it feels very, it does feel cabaret still, but it also feels more so like almost variety, because it's a very broad, sort of wide range, I would say, of what you might see.
Yeah.
Obviously music-centric,
yeah.
But that means bands, comedians who sing, and also just comedians.
And also just comedians, totally.
Improv type of things, more theatrical things. I've seen a lot of different things. I don't know if that's a consistent priority or if that was always the case.
Yeah, that's always been the case. In my knowledge of the sort of breadth of the programming, the way that we institutionally talk about what we do and why sort of has changed as as words change and as needs change, and really the landscape of the city has changed too. We used to say that we were genre blind, and that just started to feel really passive. Of like, we don't care about genre. Actually, we deeply care about what you do and how you do it and the community you exist within. So saying that we're genre blind has actually never been true. And so, and also saying genre blind sort of like acknowledges and empowers the idea of genres as a meaningful container for things. And maybe that's actually not how we program at all.
Now you could say, I know that you're supposed to say genre expansive.
Yes, I've heard genre expansive before. I've heard genre bounding. It's all, words are hard. It's hard to talk about art because art's more efficient. And sometimes it's hard to talk about the thing that we're doing that actually is a more sort of efficient, articulate thing than talking in the first place, and sometimes spin in circles talking about.
But it's usually 2 shows a night, you say, and 2 different.
Almost always 2 different shows a night.
Usually about an hour long?
Yeah, they're about an hour and a half. There's really no secrets. We tell people 75 minutes, knowing that when you're on stage, time is hard. So we just leave a little headroom in there. Sometimes things are closer to an hour, sometimes things are closer to an hour and a half, but it always sort of comes out in the wash.
And would you say that, I've always felt that it is very sort of boundary pushing, for sure.
Thank you.
That seems like that's the intention a lot.
Yeah, there's so many incredible other performing arts spaces in the city, whether our peer clubs or other performing arts centers, or, to scale up to like Town Hall and Carnegie Hall. There's so many home bases for folks. And so we really try to be thoughtful in thinking of Joe's Pub as a tool in any artist's sort of toolbox, and when's the right time to sort of use Joe's Pub instead of Mercury Lounge, instead of Le Poisson Rouge, or in addition to, or in supplement to, building up towards something, or sort of coming down from something even, scope-wise, simplicity-wise. Sometimes folks have really grand ambitions, but it's nice to have a container of nobody's expecting the perfect polished thing at Joe's for an artist that maybe has developed musicals for Broadway. When you come to Joe's, you're not expecting the full production. You're really coming to hear the music and get a taste of the process. But we try to find some boundaries and poke at them where we can. I always say we love a hyphen. Any artist that's sort of intersecting or smushing between communities or genres or even mediums is really interesting. And there's artists that, sometimes are on tour through the U.S. and sometimes it feels like, well, if they don't play with us, I'm worried they might skip New York, and we really want them to be here. And sometimes that's a great reason to say yes, just because there's a story or a style or really just a musician or artist that we want to be here, and so we have the ability to make space. Yeah,
well, I've been following a bit some of these residency programs. The emerging artist, as far as I know, it's the last 5 years you've had a program?
Yeah, the Joe's Pub Working Group. Yeah, we've sort of worked on refining that. It's changed names 3 times. It started out as, I think it was Joe's Pub Artist in Residence. We call it JP Air. And that was really, the first year we just invited our friends and sort of, we don't know what this thing's going to be. Do you want to build this with us? Figure out what the needs are. And over the last couple of years, we've really realized that having a performance residency is different than having a cohort artist-driven residency. So we've been really been trying to lean into articulating that while the working group may perform on the stage throughout the year, and that's of course wonderful, it's not necessarily like what it's about. You can do that in addition to being part of the monthly meetings, and we have like speed dating with curators and producers. We hire an accountant to help during tax season, and we have pitch sessions, and we have self-funding sort of how-tos, and try to build a toolkit, and also acknowledge that putting artists together, we encourage them to think about like, what are your questions, but also what are your answers? Because if an artist can ask a room of other artists for help, I don't know. I'm not an artist. I'm not a gigging artist. I don't really know how to help anybody except by putting a thoughtful room of artists together and resource share. And so that's there's so many ways where I sort of say yes and stay out of the way, because I'm not an expert. I'm not a musician. I'm not like a director or a dramaturg or anything. I just sort of smush the people.
I mean, I think the feeling is that more and more so, and it's not a new story. It's not a new New York story, but the challenge is harder and harder for emerging artists.
For sure.
Even to just get here, be here, make it here, just survive at all.
And pay rent,
Yeah, and so I think more and more these places that are facilitating that are more and more valuable.
Thank you. Yeah,
definitely.
We're trying. and the pandemic has been rough, and for every door that closed for a peer venue or a place that does sort of incubate artists or smaller venues, I feel like there's been a real noticeable gap in capacity-wise, like the middle. There's a lot of small rooms, and they're opening particularly further in the outer borough neighborhoods, which I think is great. I live in Brooklyn. I love that there's, Public Records is there for a walking distance home, and I can still go to Roulette, and Littlefield and Bell House are there. Like, this is great, and I want to make sure that we are aware of our presence in the city as sort of like a really big air quotes here, like mainstream space. How can we help to be a part of continuing the lifeline and the professional careers for artists to be able to play Bell House and us, and not say, oh, you can't do both because we're competing. Like that to me is how I saw a band t-shirt one time that said touring Manhattan since 1979. It's like, yeah, that's amazing. Like how do we create resources where artists can live and work here and create here and not feel like they can only play a show every 6 months because they're going to burn out their fan base or their promoter relationships or whatever it may be.
Right. Big challenge.
Big challenge that I don't have the answers for.
So I would consider the wins to be a lot of support that you've given to emerging artists who have gone on to bigger venues, bigger, whatever you want to say, bigger career moves. That has really been a bit of a launching pad.
Yeah.
And then now, what are you saying? Tell me about these things you're not doing well.
Oh, there's probably more things we're not doing well than I even know. There's, I forget who is. Somebody has a theory about the sort of like known knowns and the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. Those are the scary things. The unknown unknowns of like, oh God, I don't even know that I missed that. For everything that I'm really proud of that we do, I wish we could do more or less. Like, I can't add more seats to the room. The room is the size that it is for every sort of like. For every opportunity that we say, this is exactly what it is, and an artist is like, that's exactly what I need. We love those. And then there's artists that we talk to and they want to do a standing room show. And like the room just doesn't really work as standing room general admission. And so we don't have, I'm sometimes jealous of spaces like National Sawdust that can sort of be a little bit of a shapeshifter and sort of meet this flexible thing. And so how do we, I guess the things we're not doing, I'm beating myself up a little bit about the things we're not doing well, but I try to balance like, how do we equally embrace and resist the urge to be everything to everyone?
Right.
Because that's impossible and we could constantly be chasing that. However, that's also the most exciting part of the mission to me is the work is never done because there's always more people to reach or to meet or to reflect or to uplift or to put on our stage or invite into the audience. So the never-endingness is sort of equally the double-edged sword of it all.
I mean, there are constraints just within the space and the scope.
And that's going to be true anywhere, but I know the ones that I know. And everywhere else is perfect and there's no constraints because I don't know them.
No, but constraints are always helpful, actually.
Yes. Agreed. And
knowing the constraints can actually help you be more creative, right?
I agree.
I just would imagine that it's a balance, a constant balance of when it comes to sort of the talent level, or I don't know if that's not the right word even to say it, but where are they at in their creative process is sort of what the conversation is, I would guess.
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. There's so many reasons to say yes, and that's part of what I love about my job is like we can say yes because we want to support an artist that doesn't have a huge fan base, and how do we be a part of them building one? That's a reason to say yes. Sometimes artists want to grow with us. Alan Cumming can do shows at bigger spaces, and every now and again he does them with us. Great. We love that. That's super fun to be able to be a comfortable space for him and for his audience alike to be able to be there. And then, thinking about springboards, I think about Celise Henderson, who was in the Joe's Pub working group, and she was part of a Bridget Everett show called Rock Bottom that ran for a little while. And then in the working group, she really wanted to develop her own sort of like presence as a band leader and as a musician, and not exclusively as a backup singer or a Broadway company member. And so she sort of had this really clear-eyed vision of like, what do I want to do? What's the way forward? And we hung out with her for a year and we still keep in touch, but mostly like her star, she rose her own star. And that's sort of how can we help artists be confident and know the tools available to them to be able to take it to the next place and know that they can call us if they want help or guidance or to bounce something around for a little bit. So I balance is totally the word, because I'm constantly balancing feeling proud of artists that go on, but also like humbling because we didn't do that. Like Celise did all of that herself. And all of these artists are really doing everything themselves. And we can create a container and create best case scenario for them to be able to build and grow.
Yeah. I want to know about the 25th anniversary coming up, but I'd love to know, I'm kind of interested in how the internet age, as far as social media, and and the way that people have, been emerging online, different kind of independent way of bootstrapping yourself has affected live performance. If you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, I will couch my answer in a lot of ignorance for many reasons. I'm almost 40, and so I'm not sort of the perfect. I'm sort of that what do they call it, elder millennial, where I remember running around pre-internet, and so I think my relationship with it is maybe singular because I'm me, but also like I'm part of a community or a generation that sort of remembered the before times. I also have a 4-year-old, so my sort of awareness of the greater world is very skewed as far as like free time. And so, yeah, I don't really, this is me talking, this is not Joseph Papp talking, this is not sort of like professional advice talking, but for me as Alex, like I don't watch videos with sound on the internet. I truly don't. It's always muted. I'm not really discovering music that way. I mostly am watching like chefs making recipes. That's my internet version. I'm not really sourcing or scouting anybody in that way. And this is sort of my music busy hat coming on now. Like in the sort of emergence of America's Got Talent and oh my God, what's the huge singing show that I can't remember right now?
Oh,
American Idol.
Yes.
Like in the sort of like, if you're not Kelly Clarkson, being on American Idol means something very different than if you're Kelly Clarkson.
Right.
And so it's all just sort of like, I think there's a very separate ecosystem that is internet talent and fan base.
Yeah.
That's different from sitting in a space and breathing the same air and feeling oral vibrations of somebody performing. And it's not a two-way street. Not always. You can be an amazing live performer and not really have that translate to TikTok. And you can be an incredible performer on your Instagram reels are hilarious, but fall flat in front of live people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really special person to be able to do both equally. Yeah. I think it has to be different. I think the execution does best when it's tailored for one medium or another.
Okay,
Thinking
that's
about
so
like
great. Yeah.
Catherine Cohen, who has,
I went to the show.
Yeah, that show was amazing.
Yeah,
and
very
that's
funny.
a live show.
Very funny.
Like she did the twist. We filmed the twist for a comedy special. And so obviously that was on TV and that was great, but it was also filmed in a room with humans laughing and breathing and drinking. And so I think we as the at-home viewer of that live capture get the benefit of the energy in the space. Mm-hmm. And I think that she does podcasts, she writes poetry, she writes op-eds, and those are all really different. And I think she does such a brilliant job of knowing what strengths to put forward in different mediums instead of like using one paintbrush for everything, which is really hard.
I mean, my humble biased opinion, because my background is theater.
Yes, I want to hear it.
Is just to say that I do think that now more than ever, this live experience is so valuable.
Yeah.
As we go online more and more and more, of course, that's its own thing and its own medium, and it's exciting and it's offering opportunities that weren't there before. But then how does that translate to this live communication and connection?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a rarity and a very specialized thing to be able to do it all. And I think that we as sort of audience members and fans sometimes get sucked into thinking that somebody's supposed to be good at everything. And that's really hard too. We have this conversation annually in the working group where an artist is an expert at their craft at singing and hasn't really been able to figure out their comfort zone on the internet, on social media. What do I share? What's me as a performer? What's me as me? How much of my life does my sort of fans of my singing, how much do they get access to? And that's so personal and different.
Sure.
And I think it's really hard. And I think the tools to be a professional artist are sort of nebulous, and it feels like there's a secret locked box somewhere that has everything in it. I often think about like going to high school and wishing that somebody had taught me how to do my taxes. That there had been like I don't know, a life readiness class.
Yeah, some of these basics that we don't get.
Well, yeah, we're not going to get it. Change your oil, do your taxes, like these things that thankfully people were looking out for each other in smaller communities. But structurally, I think that there's some cases that do it well. But if you go to a conservatory or another like career track performer education system, that I would love to see more sort of tools coming into those folks. And how do we provide tools for people that aren't going into higher education systems, that are building their own paths and finding their own ways, and make those resources available, so we can all not feel like you're gaming the system because you know how to send a 1099. Like, we should all know how to do that.
Right.
That's good. That's good for everybody. And not sort of a like, I did it, I'm good at this. It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Okay, so 25 years coming up.
What to say about the 25th? It's like, in honesty, I'm sort of trying to figure out, my big question is institutional anniversaries. For who and why do we celebrate these things? And everyone is I don't want to discount the 24 years leading up to now and the legacy. I live and breathe the legacy and the importance of everyone who crosses our stage every day. And how do we keep that in balance with, like, I don't know, a performer's birthday is more important than an institution's birthday. And there's celebrations every day and every year. So I'm trying to balance, like you said. How do we hold the sort of like urgency and great privilege and you know, sometimes pressure of staying around? Like, that to me is like, what's the next 25 years? Because you know, if another venue closes,
I know,
how do we stay open?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a foregone conclusion. The public theater is not going anywhere, and I want to make sure that Joe's Pub doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't really have anything to do with me. So we're and what I love about the 25th anniversary is programming the 25th anniversary is really easy, because it's just like programming the 24th anniversary, the 23rd, the 22nd, the 21st. We're really striving to constantly have a really clear respect and reverence for artistic relationships that we have and institutional relationships we have. What is the world that we're living in right now? Best case scenario, and this is not something that's always the case, but best case scenario, if there's a major cultural movement happening, or even God forbid, a major cultural catastrophe, or community that's being oppressed, if we're doing our job well, the folks whose voices need to be heard are already on our stage in that space. I really try not to be reactive. I try to just be, how do we be expansive so that somebody has a voice when they have something to say? And sometimes those moments are really specific, and sometimes those moments are just a lifetime of moments. So how do we continue to maintain relationships and history and real, like, bedrock of so many things over 25 years, and consider where we are now, that the city is changing. I don't think we're really at the plateau of what the city, this neighborhood is. I think it's coming. I think that people are sort of finding their groove again, but I don't really think we've sort of leveled back out a little bit. And so that feels like now. Like,
you mean out of the last...
I hate to have everything be sort of like COVID pandemic era,
yeah.
But I think people's going out habits are still figuring themselves out.
Sure.
I think the rubber band hasn't totally snapped back of like the restaurants that closed.
Yeah.
And the new restaurants haven't all come back yet.
Right.
And so there's a lot of empty storefronts. I think that the housing crisis is very much not resolved.
Very real.
Is this bubble going to burst? Is it going to be something else? So whenever I start to feel like, oh my God, it's not going to get better, name drop incoming, I sort of expressed this sort of like not hopeful foresight to the next couple of years with housing getting so expensive and these apartment buildings or office buildings being empty, and sort of like, what's going to happen? And Lori Anderson, who was in residency with us the last couple of years, was sort of like, yeah, you can look at it with despair or you can look at it with optimism. In the 70s, it wasn't like people just gave us these lofts because it was a gift to the downtown arts community. Like, we took them and we made them ours and we made something and we got really dirty and it got messy and then we created something lasting. And I'm deeply paraphrasing. But that's inspiring to actually have somebody who has created really so much of what the city is that we live in have optimism out of this really hard last couple of years as sort of a city and as a community, and also particularly for our field, it's still really battered and bruised. And so that to me is sort of like the way forward. I take really great comfort that the Public Theater has a lot of support from the city and from New Yorkers to be able to sustain ourselves as an institution, but I want to make sure that we don't take that for granted and we take that good faith and that good effort and do something with it. So past, nice. Present, future is just always what it's about.
That was very nice.
Thanks.
I mean, that feels like a natural conclusion unless there's anything else you want us to be aware of that's coming up.
I think, assuming that we're going on September 15?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. I think the only thing to talk about is we're throwing just sort of like a neighborhood birthday party on Saturday, September 23rd at the Astor Place Cube. We're working with our friends at the Village Alliance who help us to put on little block parties in that space. And so we're going to have an afternoon of brass bands and marching bands with Slavic Soul Party and Gina Brass Band and Fogo Azul, 3 to 6 in the afternoon. We'll just kind of be out there partying for the afternoon. So come one, come all. You don't need a ticket. There's no gates. You just come on by.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, that'll be special.
Looking forward to that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you. An honor to be here.